Students like you never really belong here, do they? Ms. Henderson's voice cut through the classroom, her eyes fixed on Marcus James, the only black student in the room. The air grew heavy with tension, but what Ms. Henderson didn't realize was that Marcus's father held the power to dismantle her prejudice. St. Edward's Academy was a prestigious private school, renowned for its academic excellence and elite reputation. Nestled in the heart of a thriving suburban neighborhood, its grandiose facade with towering pillars and manicured lawns spoke of tradition and privilege. Parents paid exorbitant fees to secure their children a spot, believing the school promised unparalleled opportunities for their future. Despite its polished exterior, St. Edward's harbored hidden cracks within its foundation. While the school touted values of diversity and inclusivity, whispers of favoritism and subtle biases were not uncommon. Students from privileged backgrounds often received unspoken advantages, while minority students were left to prove themselves tenfold. These underlying prejudices were rarely addressed, brushed aside as misunderstandings or ignored entirely. Inside the classrooms, the disparity was evident. Ms. Carol Henderson's history class was a prime example. The walls were adorned with posters of famous historical figures, maps, and quotes about learning from the past. Yet the atmosphere was far from inspirational for everyone. Ms. Henderson, a senior teacher with years of experience, often favored students she deemed deserving. Emma Wilson, the daughter of a prominent donor, always received glowing praise, while Marcus James, a bright and diligent black student, was often overlooked or subtly undermined. During class discussions, Marcus's thoughtful answers were frequently met with curt nods, while Emma's average contributions earned effusive praise. Other students observed this pattern, but remained silent, unwilling to challenge authority. For Marcus, every day felt like walking a tightrope, knowing his every move would be scrutinized more harshly than his peers. The school prided itself on its stellar reputation, but for students like Marcus, it was clear that the promise of equality was merely a facade, hiding an unspoken hierarchy rooted in prejudice. Marcus James was no ordinary student. At 14 years old, he had already developed a sharp mind and a curiosity that set him apart. With a passion for science and engineering, Marcus often stayed late in the library, poring over books about innovators like George Washington Carver and Mae Jemison. He dreamed of one day building inventions that could change lives. Born into a supportive family, Marcus had always been taught the values of perseverance and dignity. His mother, Sarah, worked as a journalist, and his father, doctor. Robert James was newly appointed as the head of the school board. The James family believed in the power of education and often encouraged Marcus to rise above challenges. At St. Edward's Academy, Marcus's intelligence was undeniable, but he often found himself overlooked. His achievements were dismissed as luck, while his mistakes, no matter how minor, were scrutinized. It wasn't uncommon for teachers like Ms. Henderson to cast doubt on his abilities, subtly questioning whether he truly belonged among the school's elite. Despite these challenges, Marcus remained composed. In class, he asked probing questions, eager to understand concepts beyond surface-level explanations. His peers respected his intellect, but were often hesitant to support him openly, fearing backlash from teachers like Ms. Henderson. Outside the classroom, Marcus was a quiet but friendly presence. He loved basketball, often playing with his best friend, George Thompson, after school. Their friendship had weathered the years since kindergarten, standing as a testament to mutual respect and understanding despite their differing racial backgrounds. Marcus had grown accustomed to navigating a world that seemed designed to challenge him at every turn. Yet, his determination never wavered. Because, as his father often reminded him, the best way to overcome prejudice was to prove them wrong. Ms. Carol Henderson was one of St. Edward's Academy's most senior teachers, a figure both feared and respected. Known for her strict demeanor and high expectations, she had earned a reputation for shaping disciplined students. However, beneath her polished professionalism lay biases that were rarely spoken of but deeply felt by certain students. To most parents and staff, Ms. Henderson appeared fair and committed to academic excellence. She had a knack for building connections with influential families, often favoring their children in subtle yet impactful ways. Students like Emma Wilson, whose parents were major donors, were showered with praise, even for average efforts. Marcus James, on the other hand, felt the sting of her dismissiveness almost daily. Ms. Henderson's biases rarely manifested overtly, making them harder to call out. Instead, they showed up in the way she allocated attention, in the tone she used, and in the assumptions she made about her students. When Marcus raised his hand in class, her responses were curt, as though indulging him was a chore. In contrast, Emma's responses, no matter how simplistic, were met with enthusiastic encouragement. In group projects, her bias became even more apparent. She would subtly guide groups to ensure that privileged students like Emma received more speaking time, while students like Marcus were relegated to lesser roles. Once, when Marcus excelled in a project, Ms. Henderson attributed it to luck rather than talent, brushing aside his contributions as an exception, not the norm. Her behavior extended beyond academics. During a recent class debate, Marcus had respectfully corrected a point she made about historical events. Instead of acknowledging his perspective, Ms. Henderson doubled down, dismissing his correction as irrelevant. Her tone was sharp, and the humiliation lingered in the air, silencing Marcus and discouraging others from supporting him. While many students noticed her favoritism, few dared to speak up. They knew challenging Ms. Henderson could bring her ire, a prospect no one wanted. For Marcus, her prejudice wasn't just unfair. It was a reminder that no matter how hard he worked, he would always have to fight harder than his peers just to be seen as equal. It was Monday morning, and Ms. Henderson stood at the front of the classroom, assigning groups for an important debate project. The topic was technological advancements, a blessing or a curse. Marcus was paired with Emma Wilson and Ryan Peterson. As usual, Marcus was eager to contribute, immediately brainstorming ideas with his group. He proposed a balanced argument that highlighted both the benefits and ethical challenges of modern technology. While Emma seemed indifferent, Ryan suggested vague points that lacked depth. Marcus, determined to make their presentation strong, took the lead, crafting arguments, finding supporting data, and rehearsing the delivery. When the day of the debate arrived, their group stood before the class to present. Marcus introduced the topic with confidence, seamlessly transitioning to their key points. Emma delivered her section next. While her arguments were disjointed and lacked clarity, Ms. Henderson nodded approvingly, smiling as though she were watching a star in the making. When Marcus resumed to wrap up the discussion, offering thought-provoking insights, Ms. Henderson's demeanor shifted. She crossed her arms and frowned slightly, as if waiting to catch a mistake. Once the presentation ended, Ms. Henderson began her feedback. She praised Emma for her poise and effort, and commended Ryan for his improved confidence. But when it came to Marcus, her critique was cutting. "You relied too heavily on theoretical points," she said. "Next time, focus on more practical examples. And remember, teamwork is about balance, not overshadowing your group." Marcus's face burned as his classmates exchanged glances. He had done most of the work, yet Ms. Henderson's words made it sound as though he had been a hindrance rather than the backbone of the project. Marcus remained silent, clenching his fists under the desk, determined not to show how deeply her words had cut him. Across the classroom, George Thompson watched quietly. He had known Marcus long enough to recognize the subtle injustice at play. George wanted to speak up, but like many others, he hesitated, unsure if standing up to Ms. Henderson would make things worse. The following week, Ms. Henderson began a lesson on historical inventions and their impact on modern society. She walked around the classroom, pointing at students to answer questions. When she reached Marcus, her expression hardened. "Marcus, can you tell us who invented the telephone?" she asked, her tone sharp. Marcus hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by her sudden question. "Alexander Graham Bell," he replied confidently. "That's correct," Ms. Henderson said, before adding with a smirk, "though it's surprising you knew that. You've been so quiet lately, I wasn't sure you were paying attention." The class chuckled lightly, and Marcus felt his stomach churn. As the lesson continued, Marcus couldn't shake the tension. Then came the moment that changed everything. Ms. Henderson presented an example about industrial labor practices in the 19th century, but misstated a key fact about workers' conditions during that time. Marcus, who had recently read about this topic, raised his hand to clarify. "Actually, Ms. Henderson," Marcus began carefully, "I think the working hours you mentioned were adjusted after the Labor Reform Acts in the late 1800s. Ms. Henderson froze, her expression turning cold. The class went silent. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Are you suggesting I'm wrong?" "No, ma'am," Marcus replied quickly. "I just wanted to add to what you said." "That's enough," Ms. Henderson snapped, cutting him off. "Perhaps you should focus on mastering the basics before trying to teach the class." Her words were sharp and loud enough to sting. A few students exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to speak up. Marcus felt a lump in his throat as he sank into his seat. George gave him a sympathetic look, but the damage had been done. Ms. Henderson continued the lesson as though nothing had happened, but Marcus's mind raced with embarrassment and anger. That evening, he sat quietly at the dinner table, barely touching his food. When his mother asked him what was wrong, Marcus hesitated. Finally, he told her everything. Her eyes hardened with resolve as she listened, and Marcus could feel a shift. "We're not letting this go," she said firmly. The morning after Marcus confided in his mother, Sarah James wasted no time. She called her husband, Dr. Robert James, and shared every detail. As head of the school board, Robert was no stranger to handling sensitive situations, but hearing about Marcus's humiliation ignited a fire in him. "Bias like this shouldn't exist anywhere, let alone in a school that claims to value diversity," he said, his voice calm but firm. Sarah agreed, but she knew Marcus needed reassurance first. That evening, she sat with him and reminded him of the strength their family stood for. "Your voice matters, Marcus," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "And we'll make sure it's heard." Dr. James decided not to act immediately. Instead, he planned to observe the situation firsthand without revealing his position. He advised Marcus to stay composed and focus on his work while they gathered the necessary evidence to confront the school. At the same time, Marcus found quiet strength in his parents' support. While the weight of Ms. Henderson's words still lingered, he resolved to keep doing his best. Deep down, he knew that this wasn't just about him. It was about standing up against the unfair system he had been forced to endure. The following week, Dr. James arrived home early, determined to hear every detail directly from Marcus. Sitting across from him at the kitchen table, Marcus hesitated at first, but with gentle encouragement, he began recounting his experiences. "She always finds a way to make me feel small," Marcus said, staring at his hands. "Even when I do my best, it's like she's already decided I don't belong." Dr. James listened intently, his expression unreadable. As Marcus continued, Sarah chimed in, recounting stories she had heard from other parents about Ms. Henderson's tendency to favor certain students. The pattern of subtle bias became clear. Students from privileged backgrounds thrived under her, while others, like Marcus, faced constant scrutiny and dismissal. Dr. James leaned back in his chair, his face tense with thought. "It's not just about her personal bias," he said finally. "It's about the culture that allows it to go unchecked. If we don't address this, it will keep happening." The next day, Dr. James began his investigation. He reviewed school policies on teacher conduct and spoke discreetly with a few other parents, uncovering similar complaints. One parent mentioned how Ms. Henderson had given her child low marks despite clear evidence of strong performance. Another described how their child had stopped participating in class entirely due to Ms. Henderson's dismissive attitude. Dr. James also reached out to George, who confirmed Marcus's account of the group debate and Ms. Henderson's unfair feedback. "She didn't even look at him the same way," George said, frustration in his voice. "It's like she had already made up her mind." With this growing body of evidence, Dr. James decided it was time to intervene. He contacted the school principal, requesting a formal meeting to discuss Ms. Henderson's behavior. However, he chose not to reveal his identity as the head of the school board just yet. Instead, he planned to see how the school would respond before making his position known. In the meantime, he reminded Marcus to stay focused. "You've done nothing wrong, son," he said firmly, "and soon we'll make sure everyone knows it." Over the next few days, Ms. Henderson's behavior toward Marcus became increasingly antagonistic. It wasn't overt enough to draw immediate attention, but to Marcus it was impossible to miss. She frequently called on him in class, setting him up with questions far more challenging than the ones given to his peers. If Marcus answered correctly, she would dismiss his response with a curt, "That's adequate," while more basic answers from others earned her warm praise. During a literature discussion, Marcus raised his hand to share his thoughts on a novel they were studying. "It's interesting how the main character's decisions reflect the systemic challenges of the time," he said, his voice steady but hesitant. Ms. Henderson folded her arms. "That's one way to interpret it," she said, her tone dripping with skepticism. "But perhaps you should stick to the literal meanings before diving into deeper analysis." The class fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Marcus lowered his gaze, feeling the familiar knot of frustration in his chest. George glanced at him from across the room, his expression sympathetic but powerless. Things escalated further during a science project presentation. Marcus, having spent hours perfecting his portion, confidently explained his team's innovative approach to solving an environmental issue. As he spoke, Ms. Henderson interrupted him mid-sentence. "Where did you get this idea?" she asked sharply. "This doesn't seem like something you came up with on your own." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I researched it," he replied, trying to keep his voice calm. Ms. Henderson's skeptical look didn't waver. "Research is one thing, but make sure you're not copying ideas without proper credit. Plagiarism is a serious matter." The accusation stung. Marcus could hear a few murmurs from his classmates, and the shame burned in his chest. Later that day, George caught up with him in the hallway. "You know she's wrong, right?" he said, trying to lift Marcus's spirits. Marcus nodded, but the weight of Ms. Henderson's treatment lingered. He wasn't sure how much longer he could endure it, but he also knew his parents were working quietly in the background. That thought gave him a glimmer of hope. By the end of the week, Marcus had reached his breaking point. Ms. Henderson's constant undermining had made the classroom feel like a battlefield, and he was tired of walking on eggshells. During another group assignment, Marcus and his team were asked to present solutions for a global economic challenge. As usual, Marcus had done most of the work, but Ms. Henderson made her disdain clear before they even began. "Let's see if this presentation has any actual teamwork this time," she said with a pointed look at Marcus. The words cut deep, but he refused to let it show. The presentation began, with Marcus stepping up to deliver their main argument. He spoke with confidence, outlining an innovative plan that drew praise from his peers. But as he finished, Ms. Henderson stood with a smirk. "Marcus, once again, you've managed to overshadow your group," she said. "This isn't the Marcus show. You need to learn how to share credit, even when your contributions are adequate." A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke. Marcus, however, felt something stir within him. He had been patient, respectful, and composed, but now he had had enough. With all due respect, Ms. Henderson, Marcus began, his voice steady but firm. I don't think it's fair to judge my efforts based on assumptions. I worked hard on this, just like everyone else, and I deserve to be recognized for it. The room went silent. Ms. Henderson's face darkened, her smirk fading. Excuse me? She said, her tone sharp. Marcus didn't falter. You always find a way to criticize me no matter how much effort I put in. It feels personal, and it's not right. Ms. Henderson opened her mouth to respond, but the principal, Mr. Collins, happened to walk into the classroom at that exact moment. He paused, sensing the tension. Is there a problem here? He asked. Marcus looked at him, his resolve unshaken. No, sir, he said, before returning to his seat. But in his heart, he knew he had finally taken the first step toward standing up for himself. The day after Marcus stood up for himself, Dr. James decided it was time to step in. While he had been gathering information in the background, Marcus's quiet resolve made him realize the urgency of the situation. Arriving at St. Edward's unannounced, Dr. James walked through the polished hallways, his presence commanding attention. He had intentionally kept his role as head of the school board under wraps, wanting to see the school's true colors. He headed straight to the administrative office and requested permission to sit in on one of Marcus's classes, citing an interest in observing teaching methods. The receptionist, unaware of his authority, readily agreed and escorted him to Ms. Henderson's history class. As Dr. James entered, Ms. Henderson offered a polite but hesitant smile. She had no idea who he was, but welcomed him as a guest observer. Marcus's eyes widened slightly when he saw his father, but Dr. James gave a small nod, signaling him to stay focused. During the lesson, Dr. James witnessed Ms. Henderson's dismissive attitude firsthand. When Marcus raised his hand to answer a question, she acknowledged him with a reluctant nod and quickly moved on to another student without offering feedback. In contrast, she lavished praise on Emma for an answer that was nearly identical. Dr. James's expression remained neutral, but inside, his resolve hardened. As the class ended, he thanked Ms. Henderson and made his way to the principal's office. On his way, he passed Marcus in the hallway and gave him a reassuring look. "You're doing great, son," he said softly. What Dr. James had seen was enough. It was time to reveal his role and confront the issue head-on. Dr. James walked into the principal's office with the calm authority of a man who knew exactly what needed to be done. Principal Collins stood to greet him, his expression one of polite curiosity. "Dr. James," he said, extending a hand. "I wasn't expecting you. What brings you here today?" Dr. James shook his hand firmly, his tone measured but serious. "I'm here as a parent and the head of the school board," he said, watching the principal's expression shift to surprise. "I need to address a pressing issue concerning one of your staff members. Ms. Henderson." Principal Collins gestured for him to sit. "Of course. Is there a specific concern?" "There is," Dr. James replied. "I've been observing her behavior toward my son, Marcus. It's clear she's displaying patterns of bias that are not only unprofessional, but deeply harmful to the inclusive values this school claims to uphold." Collins frowned, leaning forward. "Bias? Could you elaborate?" Dr. James detailed the incidents Marcus had experienced, the dismissal of his contributions, the false accusations, and the public humiliation in class. He also shared feedback from other parents and students, presenting a pattern of prejudice that couldn't be ignored. "I observed it myself today, Doctor," James added. "She showed clear favoritism toward certain students while undermining Marcus at every opportunity." Collins sighed, his expression conflicted. "Ms. Henderson has been with us for years, and she's always been considered one of our best. This is, troubling to hear." Before Collins could continue, the door opened, and Ms. Henderson entered. She froze momentarily upon seeing Dr. James, but quickly recovered. "Principal Collins, you wanted to see me?" "Yes, Ms. Henderson," Collins said, gesturing for her to sit. "This meeting concerns your treatment of Marcus James." Ms. Henderson's smile faltered. "Treatment? I don't understand." Dr. James cut in, his voice firm but controlled. "It's clear from your behavior that you've allowed personal biases to affect your teaching. Your actions have humiliated my son and likely others. I've seen it firsthand, and I have evidence to back it up." Ms. Henderson's face flushed. I treat all my students fairly," she stammered. "If Marcus feels slighted, perhaps he's misinterpreting my intentions." Dr. James leaned forward, his gaze steady. "This isn't about feelings. It's about facts. You failed to uphold the standards this school demands. As head of the school board, I cannot allow this to continue." Collins cleared his throat. "Ms. Henderson, until we conduct a full investigation, I have no choice but to place you on administrative leave. Dr. James, we will ensure this matter is handled swiftly and appropriately." As Ms. Henderson left the room in stunned silence, Dr. James turned to Collins. "This school has potential, but only if it practices what it preaches. I'll be watching closely." The news of Ms. Henderson's suspension spread quickly through the school. Students whispered in the hallways, some surprised, others quietly relieved. For Marcus, the feeling was bittersweet. While he was grateful that his father had intervened, the lingering sting of humiliation still weighed on him. In the days following the confrontation, the school administration launched a formal investigation into Ms. Henderson's conduct. Dr. James had provided written accounts from parents and students, as well as his personal observations. Several students, including George, came forward to share their own experiences. "She always treated Marcus differently," George said in his statement. "It wasn't fair, and we all saw it." The evidence was undeniable. Ms. Henderson's long-standing favoritism and dismissive behavior toward certain students painted a clear picture. The administration, under pressure from the school board, announced a comprehensive review of teacher conduct policies. Meanwhile, Dr. James worked to ensure lasting change. He proposed mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff, emphasizing the importance of recognizing and addressing implicit bias. "Education is about more than academic excellence," he stated during a board meeting. "It's about nurturing an environment where every student feels valued." As for Ms. Henderson, her suspension turned into a resignation. Unable to defend her actions, she quietly left her position, leaving behind a legacy tarnished by her prejudices. For the students she had mistreated, her departure felt like a small but significant victory. At home, Marcus felt a newfound sense of hope. One evening, as he sat with his father, he asked, "Do you think it's over?" Dr. James looked at him, his expression thoughtful. "This was a step in the right direction, but it's not over. Change takes time, and it requires people like you to stand up when things aren't right." The following week, the school held an assembly to address the changes being implemented. Principal Collins stood at the podium, acknowledging the school's shortcomings and committing to fostering a more inclusive environment. Marcus watched from his seat as his father was invited to speak. Dr. James's words were firm but inspiring. "Every student deserves a fair chance, no matter their background. Prejudice has no place in education, and we will work tirelessly to ensure that St. Edward's lives up to its promise of equality." As the assembly ended, Marcus received pats on the back from classmates who had previously stayed silent. George walked up to him with a grin. "Told you justice would come," he said. For the first time in weeks, Marcus smiled, feeling the weight on his shoulders begin to lift. He realized that while the journey wasn't over, he wasn't alone in facing it. In the weeks following Ms. Henderson's resignation, Marcus began to notice subtle but significant changes at St. Edward's Academy. Teachers seemed more aware of their words and actions, making an effort to ensure fairness in the classroom. The tension that had once shadowed Marcus's days began to ease, and he finally felt like he could breathe. What surprised him most was the shift among his classmates. Students who had previously stayed silent started to treat him with newfound respect. Emma, who had benefited from Ms. Henderson's favoritism, approached him after class one day. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she said quietly. "I didn't realize how unfair things were. You deserved better." Marcus nodded, accepting her apology but not dwelling on it. His focus was on moving forward, on reclaiming his confidence and voice. During class discussions, he spoke with conviction, no longer second-guessing himself. When his teachers praised him for his insights, it felt genuine rather than performative. At home, Marcus reflected on everything he had endured and learned. He sat down with his mother one evening, sharing his thoughts. "I used to think it wasn't worth speaking up," he admitted. "But now I know it's the only way to change things." Sarah smiled, her pride evident. "You've grown so much, Marcus, and you've shown people what strength and resilience look like." Inspired by his father's actions, Marcus decided to channel his experiences into something meaningful. He joined the school's student council, eager to advocate for other students who might feel overlooked or unheard. His first proposal was to establish a peer mentorship program to support younger students navigating challenges like his own. Dr. James was proud but not surprised by Marcus's initiative. "Leadership isn't about a title," he told him. "It's about using your voice to help others." Marcus carried those words with him, using them as a guide in his journey. While the scars of Ms. Henderson's treatment hadn't disappeared, they had shaped him into someone stronger, someone who believed in the power of justice and the importance of standing up for what was right. For Marcus, the battle wasn't just about himself. It was about paving the way for others, ensuring no one else had to endure what he did. The transformation at St. Edward's Academy was gradual but unmistakable. Following Ms. Henderson's resignation, the administration implemented several initiatives aimed at fostering a more inclusive and equitable environment. Diversity and inclusion training became mandatory for all staff, with workshops designed to help teachers identify and overcome implicit biases. For the students, the atmosphere began to shift. Teachers made an effort to encourage open dialogue in classrooms, ensuring that every voice was heard and valued. The school's student council, with Marcus as one of its newest members, worked closely with the administration to address concerns and suggest improvements. One of the most significant changes was the introduction of the peer mentorship program, Marcus's brainchild. Older students volunteered to mentor younger peers, offering guidance and support. It quickly became a success, with students reporting feeling more confident and connected within the school community. Marcus himself mentored a younger boy named Liam, who had been struggling with self-esteem issues. "You've got a lot to offer," Marcus told him one afternoon. "Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." Dr. James continued to work with the school board to uphold the new standards. His firm but fair approach earned him the respect of both parents and staff. Under his guidance, St. Edward's began to live up to its promise of providing a truly inclusive education. Though change didn't happen overnight, it was clear that progress had been made. Students like Marcus no longer felt like they were fighting the system alone. The school was no longer just a place for academic achievement. It had become a place where students could grow, thrive, and feel seen. For Marcus, seeing the school transform into a better place for everyone was more rewarding than any grade or accolade. It wasn't just about justice. It was about building something lasting. One quiet evening, Marcus and his family gathered in the living room, a rare moment where they could relax and reflect. The events of the past weeks had been challenging, but they had also brought them closer as a family. Marcus sat on the couch with his parents, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded him for weeks. Dr. James looked at his son, his expression a mix of pride and tenderness. "You've handled yourself with so much grace, Marcus," he said. "Standing up for yourself in a situation like that isn't easy, but you did it with courage." Marcus smiled faintly, the memory of Ms. Henderson's treatment still fresh, but no longer as painful. "I just got tired of staying quiet," he admitted. "It felt like no one would listen unless I said something." Sarah placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "And you were right to speak up," she said. "You've shown not just your classmates, but this entire school that standing up for what's right can lead to real change." As the evening went on, they shared stories and laughter, the tension of the past weeks finally fading. George stopped by later, joining them for dinner. "You know, Marcus," he said between bites, "I've always thought you were smart, but now I know you're brave too." Dr. James smiled at George's words. "Bravery isn't about being loud or aggressive," he said. "It's about standing firm in what you believe, even when it's hard." Marcus took those words to heart. For the first time in weeks, he felt a deep sense of pride, not just in what he had achieved, but in the lessons he had learned along the way. Together they sat as a family, stronger than ever. As the days turned into weeks, Marcus's journey became more than just a personal victory. It served as a reminder to his peers, teachers, and even the school administration that change starts with courage. His story inspired conversations about fairness and inclusivity that had long been overdue at St. Edward's Academy. Dr. James continued his work as the head of the school board, using Marcus's experience to push for policies that prioritized equity. He often referenced his son's bravery in standing up against injustice, emphasizing the importance of creating environments where every student could thrive. For Marcus, the experience shaped him in ways he hadn't expected. He learned the value of resilience, the strength in speaking out, and the power of allies like George, who supported him through it all. Though the road had been difficult, it led to meaningful change, not just for him, but for the entire school community. St. Edward's Academy was no longer just a prestigious institution. It was becoming a place where every student's voice mattered. And for Marcus, that was the greatest achievement of all, a legacy of fairness, strength, and hope for those who would follow in his footsteps.